Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the webinar, Think on Your Feet, with our presenter, Julie Ostrow. My name is Cassie Petoskey, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement for your Northwestern Alumni Association. We'll begin shortly, and we're so excited that you all are joining us for this great topic. But first, there are a few things I'd like to go over with all of you. If you have not joined us for a webinar on Big Marker just yet, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that there are a few different tabs that you can use. You can feel free to use the chat box. Right now we're sending in where we're all tuning in from. So thank you for sharing, everyone. And then you can send in your questions for Julie through the Q&A tab. And I'll be managing that and asking Julie those throughout the presentation, as well as saving time at the end to take those questions. If you experience any technical issues, you can email support@bigmarker.com, and they will assist you there. And lastly, a link to access the recording will be sent to all registrants once that processes within the next 24 hours. So now let's move on to why we are all here. As a humorous speaker and communication coach, Julie teaches organizations and corporate teams to use improv skills to improve creativity, communication, team building, problem solving, and productivity with their clients and within their organizations. Trained at the Second City in Chicago, Ostrow teaches the benefits of using humor, laughter, and improv in all aspects of our lives, including in the workplace. Having more than 20 years of corporate marketing communications experience, Ostrow is able to identify the trigger points of miscommunication and low morale in the corporate culture. By infusing her corporate experience with her humor, laughter, and improv tools, she's able to guide organizations to communication, connection, and creativity, resulting in re-inspired teams and increased productivity. I'm going to hand it over, and hopefully Julie will be joining me on the webcam here shortly, and she will take over from there.
Hello. Hey, Cassie, can you see and hear me? Can you see and hear me?
Great.
Okay, great. Hi. So I guess you can, I saw a yes from Amanda. Hello, everybody. So you can see and hear me. Yeah, I see that Cassie did do a little survey to see where everybody is from. I saw someone from North or South Dakota. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much, Cassie, for that introduction. And yes, as Cassie said, that I was trained at the Second City, and I am able to pinpoint triggers of miscommunication triggers. But what we're talking about today is how can we use improv skills in our presentations? So if you could, in the chat box, let me know if you give presentations. Where do you give it? In your school? So maybe you're in grad school. Do you give presentations for your course? Do you have to give presentations for in a corporate world? Or maybe there's some entrepreneurs out there, whether you have to give a presentation at a networking group. Church and concerts, business pitches, awesome. Business pitches are done at maybe networking groups, entrepreneur here. Who else do we have? So we've got some entrepreneurs, in-board presentations. So I've got a professor of public speaking at conferences, company presentations. Awesome. So whether you are speaking to one person or 5 people or 500 people, we can use these skills that I'm going to be talking about today. And also keep this in mind too. Because we're human, we probably make mistakes during our presentations, right? Yes? Yes. So I'm going to give a thumbs up because I know I've made mistakes. Years ago, even before, yep, I got a yep from Ginger. Years ago, before I even trained at Second City in improvisational acting at the Second City in Chicago, I was also in Toastmasters. Long time ago, 25 years ago. And it was the very first time I was giving a presentation. And I did okay. First step, second step, third step, speeches really, fourth step, I should say fourth presentation. And I bombed. And that presentation that I was giving was talking about myself. I bombed. And guess what? Because it was where I worked, I was so incredibly embarrassed to see people in the hallway who had witnessed my bomb. Well, first of all, no one else even noticed. Later on, someone said, "Oh yeah, I didn't even notice, you did fine." But I felt like quitting. And actually, I didn't give another presentation in Toastmasters for about another 10 months. Then life challenges happened, and I thought, wait a minute, if I can go through that, I should be able to get back on stage. And why am I mentioning this? It's because when you're giving a presentation, whether one person at a networking group, one-on-one, or giving your pitch, or speaking to an executive team or a board member, you are human. You are human, and you may make a mistake, and the unexpected might even happen. It does. And what are you going to do? Are you going to run off stage or run out of that networking meeting and say, oh, I quit, I can't do this, I'm a failure? Okay, those are the voices that we might have in our head, but it's important for us to talk to that voice in our head and say, hey, come on, I've got this. So just by a show of hands, how many of you have felt like that? Oh, someone can't hear me. Okay, raising hand. I've got a few people raising their hand about, so they heard me. So I'm not sure. Maybe do a little test there. Someone couldn't hear me. So yeah. I had asked. Okay, I see. Bukala said, I've definitely felt that way. So you feel like a failure. So what's important is to remember that you're the expert. And yes, we're constantly learning, but focusing on the reason they asked you to speak is because you're the expert. So what I think is really good is to keep in mind that, like I said, you are the expert. You know your material, you're prepared, and your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. I always giggle when I write or say that because I have to think. I have some friends in the humor community. There's an actual association for therapeutic humor, and they would most likely say, make sure your I's are crossed and your T's are dotted. But shout out to the humor people. But and then maybe when you're speaking, you might even say the wrong thing. You will say the wrong thing. How do you pick up where you left off? That's the most important part. And like I said, and I've said about 5 times already, you're the expert. And I've also learned when I'm giving presentations, I remember that people want you to succeed. The people in the audience do not want you to fail. They want you to succeed because they're sitting in the audience, or they're at that networking meeting, or they've called you for a cup of coffee because they want to talk with you. And this is where some self-confidence comes in. But you've prepared, you're the expert, and then the unthinkable happens. I want to go back to my, oh no, Mr. Bill. This is a cartoon from a skit from Saturday Night Live, but those who know it, I don't have to explain it, but you can Google it. And he would always get the raw end of the deal. Oh no, it's sometimes how I feel if I give a presentation and if I don't have what I need. But the most important thing that I remember is they've hired me to speak. I know my material, and guess what? I don't need the notes. I've already studied it. I know what it is. And really, if you were to go to a presentation and just read, they wouldn't be able to see you. So it's important for you to not trust so much of your written presentation, but focus on that you're the expert. I know I've said that many times, but that's important for you to remember. So the unexpected will happen. So some examples, some technical issues. So how many of you given a PowerPoint presentation and maybe the clicker doesn't work, the remote doesn't work, or maybe the lights aren't working, the microphone isn't working, something will happen. And the most important thing here is to remember to keep a positive attitude. Don't give the impression to your audience that it is a complete failure because there are technical issues. Or what about you thought the room was going to be bigger than it was? I actually had that experience. I was giving a lunch and learn for some nurses, and it was a very small conference room. So small that as they were waiting along the side of the wall, waiting to get food, and I was wheeling my bag in, I had to walk sideways and lift my bag up. I was expecting it to be an interactive presentation where the nurses were going to be up, moving around. We're going to be doing different types of improv and laughter exercises. Well, I knew the minute I walked into that room, that was not going to happen. I had to go with plan B. I didn't even know I had to have a plan B at that moment, but I did. And I guess what? The minute I walked into that conference room, yes, it was a room with a huge conference table, and I had maybe about this much room to present. An exaggeration, but you get the point. So immediately I thought, okay, plan B, and I'm not going to let the organizer know that that's not what I expected. So I went with it. So I was able to do some laughter exercises while they were sitting. So that's adapting to the situation and not freaking out. One other thing that was different about that presentation was the day before I talked to the organizer and he said, oh, make sure that you have your PowerPoint. And I said, okay, I'll put together a PowerPoint presentation, thinking, okay, that's what they're used to. I'll whip up a PowerPoint presentation, no problem. I get to that talk and I said, hey, where would you like me to plug in the PowerPoint? And he said, I don't know. We don't use those. Okay. So maybe it was a miscommunication. That's okay. Well, guess what? I never took the laptop out of my computer. I acted as if that was the plan. So you adapt to those situations. How many of you have given a presentation and someone has asked you a question that you don't know the answer to? By a show of hands, if someone has asked a question and you don't know the answer, do you look like a deer in the headlights when someone asks you a question? Yes, yes, yes. And I've got a lot of yes, oh yeah, yeps. And is it possible that you feel like quitting in that moment? Like, oh my gosh, they asked me a question I don't know the answer to. And you quickly go to, I'm not the expert. What am I doing? I need to get off stage. I think that's a good opportunity to practice some improv skills because these unexpected moments are happening. Improv is the art of creating something that was never created before and in the magic moment. Now, by now, most of you have probably understood or heard improv, the art of improv, but I like that I'm taking the art of improv into public speaking. So the rules of improvisation, if you can see this flyer here, I've got 2 circles here on the screen. The orange one shows the 3 different rules of improv. Yes and, give and take, and being in the moment. Yes and, give and take, and being in the moment. Well, wait a minute, Julie. I'm not planning on being an improv star or a comedian or anything like that. Why are we talking about improv? Well, glad you asked. Because that's a lot of the questions that people ask. Well, I don't want to be a comedian, or I'm not really that funny. But it's not the art of being funny. It's the art of accepting the unexpected and creating magic out of the unexpected. And you might be thinking these rules could also be applied off the stage, but we're talking about giving presentations right now. So yes and is adding on to other people's ideas. Another way to frame yes and is reflective listening. Just as if someone were to share something with me, I'd listen and I say, what I hear you saying is you're having a challenge at work. Now the opposite would be, oh, that's no problem. You shouldn't worry about that. And that's kind of negating what that person is saying. But instead, what you want to do is have a conversation and accept what is happening. So as I mentioned, show here on this slide, in a presentation, expect and accept the unexpected and work with it. So Cassie, if it's okay that I ask people to just share in the box here, what are some unexpected situations that you've experienced in a presentation? It could be a few things that I've mentioned before, like maybe a problem with the PowerPoint. Was there a problem with the microphone? Were you asked questions that you were not used to? So yeah, if you want to answer those questions of not enough handouts for everyone, okay. People in the audience have gone on a tangent. Mm-hmm. That happens too. Anyone else? Director keeps interrupting and derails the flow. Okay, the director. I don't know if that director is the who actually that is in the room, but the fact that you're being interrupted and derailed, that happens. Listener knows more than I know. Electricity went out. These are all common occurrences. And you might all be sitting in your offices thinking, I am the only one who thinks this. Well, there are many people out there who've experienced this. So let's start out. The electricity went out. So Michelle said the electricity went out, and what do you do? If it's a tragedy, like if there's a weather, if it's weather related, of course you're going to probably stop the event. But okay, director, senior audience member. Okay, thank you. So the electricity went out. You can still have fun with that. Well, now we all have phones. You could pull out your phone and use that as light. There's a way to use humor. In that moment, you could say, you know what? I feel like I'm left in the dark with this PowerPoint presentation, and let's continue. And with that moment, with the lights going out, that goes back to, you don't need your notes. You're the expert. You don't need the notes. Someone else said that the audience member knows more than I do. That is a really good one, because I've been asked that a lot in the last week. Like, what do I do? Well, guess what? First of all, I'm wondering if they actually know the answer to the question. They're maybe not really asking for the answer from you. Let me explain. It's very possible that they want to open up the room for a dialogue. That's possible. Another possibility is there are people who in the audience who want to let everyone know that they do know more than everybody else, and that's okay. It's your job to manage that. Your job as a speaker to manage that. And how do you manage that? An example would be, oh, you know what? I really don't know the latest findings on that research. That's a really good question, Phil. What are your thoughts on that? But you have to make sure you don't derail too much. So the trick is then let him answer a couple times, and then before saying, "Hey, that's enough," I'm gonna start talking again. This is how you can wean yourself back to controlling the room. So let's try that again. Hey, Phil, thank you so much for that question. I actually was thinking about that, and I don't have the answer to that. What is one thought that you have about that? That one thought keeps it limited. What is that one thought that you have about that? Then you can open it up to the room and say, hey, everybody, I know that Phil provided his input on that. Does anybody else have a few thoughts? You then are becoming that facilitator, not just a dictator. So you're talking and you're allowing everyone else to share their ideas. So if everyone could just show their hands, if that makes sense, or if you say, that's fine too. So if that explanation of how to handle if you don't know the answer, if you could let me know if that worked for you. Thumbs up, wave, good. Okay. All right. And then someone else said that you don't have enough handouts for everybody, and that's okay. I really don't like to have too many handouts while I'm giving a presentation. I know we have a PowerPoint presentation here, but if you have too many handouts, audience members are inclined to just look at that paper. So you could say, you know what, we don't have enough handouts for now, but if we're just going to be using these handouts as reference points anyway, and I'll have the key points on the presentation and in our exercises. Yeah, make the 1 point. So the handouts, keep them limited and maybe just bullet points, because you don't want to have a whole like a legal pad full of information, because then they're only going to be reading the paper and not paying attention to you. Think of yourself as a speaker, facilitator, to help facilitate ideas. So you really don't need those, but definitely offer, hey, you know what? I know we don't have enough, and turn it around to the positive. And I'm so excited that we have 50 more people here than we expected. So this is great. We've got positive energy here in this room today. And also remind me at the end, so-and-so who has hired me, that we'll connect at the end. I'll be sure that you get these handouts afterward. Okay, are we good to go? So that you can always turn things to a positive, not, oh my goodness, I don't have enough handouts. It's look at the positive side of it. Oh, we need more handouts. That means we have more people. And then to recap, make sure that don't rely so much on those handouts anyway. Okay, so good. All right, so the second rule of improvisation is give and take. And then I touched on this when this is a perfect skill to use when you're answering questions from the audience. Now, what I do in my in-person workshops and presentations, I give an example. I ask someone to just give me an object, an imaginary object. And I say, let's say Mary in the front row gives me a can of Coke. And I say, thank you so much, Mary. Thanks for that can of Coke. I'm going to put a straw in it and then hand it to somebody else. And then that person hands it down to that third person in the row. And you might be thinking, well, that's a really basic exercise. What does it apply? The reason I'm answering this question right now is because I've seen that look on people's faces. Well, what does this have to do with anything? Well, then the energy in the room changes when that audience member gives me that can of Coke and I say, no, it's not a can of Coke. And then I ask her to offer another object and I deny her again. And I reassure the audience, it's okay, it's going to get better. But the energy in the room shifted from positive and open to negative and degrading. So this applies to when an audience member asks a question. Yes, you're thrown off, but don't chop them off at the knees. Don't do a Tanya Harding on them. That don't say, that's not on our slide. That's not what we're talking about. And you interrupted me. But instead, listen to the question that they're asking, hear it, and have it open up to a conversation, as I mentioned when I had the other slide up. So just by a show of hands or maybe words, does that make sense? Because I think I kind of I derailed a little bit myself. So using the give and take philosophy to build onto what somebody else is saying. So just by a show of hands or good, if that makes sense. And if not, just put a question mark if you want me to elaborate on that a little bit more. Okay, cool. All right, thanks, Melissa. All right, I got the smiley faces, good. It's not that I need reassurance. Sometimes it does help, but it does help to know that I am on track. And if I am not answering the question or getting to the point, or if I am off the rails. Or another example, okay. Another example, Steve, when someone is asking a question or the unexpected, or when to use give and take. It was a loaded question. Okay, Steve is asking for another example related to give and take. So give and take, I think of as collaboration and collaborating with others. So when you go on stage and giving a presentation, or even a presentation in front of the boardroom, don't think of it's just me on stage and I'm giving information and then I'm going off stage or in front of the boardroom, whatever it may be. Think about it as I'm here to help, I'm here to give information, and I'm here to collaborate. So the give and take is really the important skill of give and take. I would say listening to your audience, listening and paying attention to what is happening in the audience and feeding off of them, and then building on to that and making sure they're not tuning out. Does that answer your question, Steve? Is that okay? Cool. All right. He said that helped. And anybody else, if you have, I can scan down here a little bit. I do want to keep going with the slides here, but you are more than welcome to put in the chat if you say, hey, what about this? What about that question? Can you give an example of that? So that's great. I appreciate the chats. This is great. So far we have the 2 rules of improv, 2 out of the 3. Give and take, yes and, give and take. And then our third one is being in the present moment. And why is this important? Yes, I included the word listening in here, but being in the present moment is a guideline that allows me to create magic moments and come up with collaboration and connection and actually thoughts and even jokes on the spot that I never would have thought of if I wrote everything down and then I read my manuscript. What being in the moment allows me to do is pick up on what is happening with the audience, what is happening with the person I'm talking to, even where are they, what kind of energy do they have, are they having a rough time. I'm thinking about a one-on-one conversation. Are they having a rough time? And let's talk about that. Let's soften up our message a little bit. But what being in the moment does, it allows us to connect. And if I am in my head, in the past, or even putting judgments on myself, judgments on the audience, then I'm completely missing out on the magic of what can happen in the moment. I know saying magic in the moment, that might sound kind of all fluffy and utopian, but let me explain. What happens in the present moment and that magic in the moment I was mentioning, think about an improv scene. Let's say there are 4 actors. 4 actors who come on stage, and in their mind, they have a clean slate. No expectations of how the scene is going to be developed. No scripting, no planning out what they're going to do. And if they had a bad day, they have to leave that off stage. Now, if they do bring that up on stage, it just creates a lot of division. Everyone is in their own heads. But what happens when all those 4 actors are in the present moment, feeding off the energy of their other players or actors, even listening to the audience too, because if there's laughter, they might even pause. They might break that 4th wall, that 4th stage wall, and interact with the audience. Now, if it were completely scripted, that wouldn't happen. If you've gone to an improv show, you've seen relationships develop, relationships unfold, imagination unfold. And that's where that happens. So when you're in the moment, you're able to truly connect with somebody, and you're able to collaborate on a level that you wouldn't have been able to before. What I love is the creative energy between more than one person. So does that make sense? Could I get a smiley face or a thumbs up? Let me know if that made sense, or a question mark if you need another example. Okay. And I did okay, cool. All right. Makes sense. Awesome. Very clear. Awesome. Thank you. And again, it's not for reassurance. It's to want to make sure that what I am saying is clear, because I can say, I know it in here, and I too, I'm speaking, not sure how it would apply in executive presentation. Okay, with given being in the moment. Well, here's the thing. Natalia had said, not sure how she would apply that in an executive presentation. Okay, so maybe you're not going to be giving an improv presentation. Oh, hey, you're not going to be joking around and creating this whole scene out of fun. But take this one element, Natalia, and all of you who have the same question. When you are in the moment, you know what? I'm going to pause myself. It is important for you to plan out your presentation. That's for sure. So I'm not saying improvise your whole speech presentation. Don't do the research on the numbers. Don't do research on what the board is asking. Have your presentation, know your information, and then be right here in the present moment, because then you're going to be more inclined to be able to answer questions of the executive board. Because you had written and studied your presentation, the information is there. The information will come. But what I would like you to do is leave space in your presentations for you to be in the moment. Leave spaces in your presentation for unexpected questions, or maybe the executive board might ask you questions that would throw you off. So be prepared for that. Does that help you a little bit more, Natalia? Okay, good. what can you do if you're going in not as prepared as you'd like? First thing that comes to my mind, Trudy, is fake it till you make it. That's depending on how much time you have. Maybe even quickly write down 3 to 5 bullet points of what you want to talk about and keep on track with those. So I'm not sure if Trudy has an actual example about that. If you're not, because what she asked, to be clear, because I think I'm putting extra words in there. She asked, what can you do if you're going in not as prepared as you'd like? So is it because you didn't have enough time to present? Is it because your boss said, hey, in 1 hour, you're going to give a presentation and you're just going to do it and you can't fight it? So I would say, sometimes, okay, you have 1 hour. She says she has 1 hour. Well, there's a reason your supervisor asked you to give the presentation. And that goes back to the very beginning of my presentation, that you're the expert. You don't need to put together a fancy PowerPoint. What I would do in that situation, I would write down 3 to 5 bullet points that I'd want to make sure I'd cover. I love legal pads. I'd write down, okay, maybe 3 to 5 bullet points. This is what I want to cover. And then maybe even underneath that, 1 to 3 bullet points of points you want to cover, want to include. Now, because you're giving a presentation in front of a boardroom or anywhere for that matter, there's no law against referring to your notes. You can do that. So this is what you have. If you're given just a short amount of time to speak, you have your expertise and your experience, and you do have notes that you can look at. Just make sure it's not a whole 10-point font and space like this. So does that help you, Trudy? So knowing that you're the expert, and in the last minute, you can create a presentation because you're the expert. All right, cool. All right. So keeping in mind, you're the expert. So you have the experience, the training, competence, learning, ability, knowledge, and you have the growth that you've had to get you to this point. And most likely you've had advanced training, whether it's attending a workshop or you've attended Dale Carnegie, or you mix up words like that, Cale Darnegie. And now did the webinar go kablooey because I was about to mess up those words? No. Okay, so this is good. We've got another question. What if you were asked to present on something and get there and they ask you to present on something else you haven't researched? Well, first of all, I would say that you were just thrown under the bus. But what are you going to do? You have your superpower suit on, so you can get up and you can escape that bus. So, but what do you do if you're asked to present on something and get there and ask you to present on something that you haven't researched? I would say go in there and present what you do know. Present on that topic that you do know and mention to the audience, I know that this is a question. Let's say they're researching on diabetes in rats, just throwing that topic out. And that's what they wanted you to research on, but you hadn't done that. You didn't have time to do that. And you give all your information on a nutritionist, you being the nutritionist that you are, the expert. And then you can say, I know there's been a lot of talk about diabetes in rats, and we're actually going to be working on that. That's really a tough one. That's interesting. That's a really good question. I thought I had the answer. And as I started talking, I realized that's a really tough one. If you're co-presenting with somebody and they know the information, hopefully you can then pass it off to them. You know what? Thinking out loud here, that might be a case where you could open up a discussion and kind of position the presentation in a panel sort of manner. What do I mean by that? So if you're in a boardroom and say your boss, Dan, wanted you to talk about that research on that topic you didn't know. You can say, you know what? Actually, Dan and I are going to be sharing with you some research that we've done. So I'm going to start out with the research that I've done in my field. And I know we're just getting on, just on the cusp of studying this new topic here. Dan, how about if you take over from there? And he might then reply, oh, yeah, we're not ready. So you could basically play ping pong with your boss and say, a gentle way of saying, that's not my information, but don't say that in front of the audience. Say, kind of lob it back over to him in a gentle way. I'm not sure if that's going to help you. And I think I like that you're talking about what you know and then ask, okay, cool. So someone did reply saying she liked the idea of talking about what you do know and then asking the audience how this applies to what they know. So that's a really good point, Melissa. So Melissa took my suggestion of when you're in front of an audience, a large audience, and they ask you a question that you don't know. That's a really good point. Taking that philosophy and using that in that setting where you're forced to talk about research that you don't know. Thanks. Thanks for that collaboration there, Melissa. And sometimes it helps to talk to other people. It's like, oh yeah, you could use that way. Great. And I don't know that person's name. I think they just put a bunch of different letters, not quite sure. Letter D, does that help you? Hopefully those that answer, and then Melissa's answer of saying, opening it up to the audience. Another way to look, I think it's hard to do that when you're in a junior position. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's tough. Okay, so I don't want to talk too much about that, but that person had expressed concern because he or she was put on the spot. And that's really what happened. What I'd really want to do if I were a consultant in that audience, in that office, I would want to say, come on, that doesn't really help your team when you throw them under the bus like that. Give them at least a couple hours warning. If there's a way, this is not public speaking, but if there's a way you can go to your boss and say, hey, you know what? I would really appreciate a heads up. I'm really good at research, but I'd really like a heads up so I can make sure that I make our department look a lot better. So that's something that you might have to do a little bit of reconnaissance work there. So I'm not quite sure if that's going to help you in that public speaking, but Melissa's suggestion of taking the opening it up to the audience. But they're looking to you as an expert because they're asking you to speak. So they're looking to you as an expert. So to recap what we've talked about, those 3 rules of improv, yes and, give and take, and being in the moment. And what it allows us to do is create a field of communication and connection and creativity and that magic in the moment. And we have some time for more questions. So Cassie, what do you think? Should we open up the dialogue even further? If any other questions have popped up since throughout this webinar, I would love to address them. Any questions or thoughts that you have? Whether it seems a little off topic or not, we'll see if we can tackle it.
Yeah, great. Julie, thank you so much for all of this great information. This has been extremely helpful. And we can definitely take more audience questions as they come through. And of course, Ginger, let's start with your question. How do you overcome anxiety before a presentation?
That's a good question. And I have anxiety before I go on. And I don't know if I call it anxiety, but it's excitement. So there are a lot of things that you can do. First of all, if you have a ritual before a presentation, and by saying ritual, that would probably indicate you're giving a lot more presentations. But if you know what you need before you put yourself out there, do that. Sometimes, for some speakers, it's really difficult to talk to anybody within an hour before their presentation. So you might not see them an hour before the presentation. So that might be where they go off into maybe they're still in their hotel room and they're meditating. So so my first suggestion would be figure out what calms you and tap into that. There are methods of releasing stress, whether it's meditation, also even some laughter exercises, believe it or not. A few people in the laughter community who are on this call know what I'm talking about. But trained in laughter yoga, I also have some skills. I have some skills. So there's one laughter exercises that you can do. This is kind of fun. So I will do this. I'll be laughing. So you can do this even out loud or not, but this is a little laughter exercise. Do this with your fingers and then first start with ha, 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 ha. Ha, 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 ha. Now, these are pressure points, like reflexology. So what you're doing in a minute, you're going to be stimulating your brain. Watch this. Now, I look like a crazy person, right? Now, what you can do, so you've done this, say, maybe that morning of your presentation, on the L on your way to your presentation. When you're backstage, you can just do this quietly. Imagine yourself laughing, and you've got your trigger points, reflexology points. Your brain is being stimulated, I believe, for your index finger. And that's good. You're getting your blood flowing. So even if you're not doing it ha, 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 out loud off stage and people think you're cuckoo, this is one way to do that. Get centered. To overcome anxiety before your presentation, another way, remember that you're the expert. Go over your notes. And then I find that when I go over, good, glad the laughter helped, Ginger. When I go over my notes too much, I then get in my head. So go over your notes, then leave them be, because then whatever message you are going to deliver in your presentation is going to be that magic presentation that you give. And it's possible that you get off stage and say, oh, I forgot to say something. That's okay. Oh, I meant to say this, or I didn't mean to say that. But it's okay. As long as you're not completely offensive and you know what I mean? I think you're going to be okay. So hopefully that helped you too. So David asked how to pivot from a question like an expert. Let's see, how to pivot from a question like an expert. I'm not quite sure the question. How to answer the question like an expert? Maybe that's what he's asking.
Maybe like a question that we don't know the answer to, how to pivot from this question as if you were an expert, but maybe not knowing that specific answer, if that makes sense.
Okay.
David, if that's not what you meant, please chime back in, but let's see what you think, Julie.
Yeah, I'll work on that. And then if my answer is not what he's looking for, like you said, you could say, hey, wait a minute, that's not it. So it kind of ties into the junior person who was talking about that research. Talk about what you know. So you are coming off as the expert, but I want to make sure that you're not answering the question the way a politician does. Answering a completely different question than what they were asking. So yes, say, hey, I do have expertise in A, B, and C, and I've found that 1, 2, and 3 happened. But how would that? Yeah, that's kind of tough, because if you don't know the question, if you don't know the answer at all, I don't want you to say anything that's not even the truth. I prefer, when I'm in in an audience, I prefer someone saying, I think that's a really good question. I never even thought of that. So So if you don't know the answer, it's okay to then share your expertise, but I apologize. But don't skirt around the issue. Don't skirt around the issue. That could be a very good example or opportunity to open up the dialogue. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and ask if other people may have feedback along with throughout the audience and see if you can get more thoughts and interaction and engagement that way.
Exactly. And you know what happens to
Mhm.
me 9 times out of 10, Cassie, and everybody else, is that if I am asked a question and a question I don't have the answer to, I open it up to the audience. That moment that those moments that I'm allowing and giving it to the audience, guess what? I start thinking of an answer. Or that, and when someone is sharing something, sharing a thought, then that triggers a thought in my brain. That is a good example of give and take.
Mm,
And
yeah.
honestly, you helped me do that when you helped me kind of help figure out what David's question was. Maybe that is what it was, because you and I worked together on that little figuring that out. I was then
Mhm.
able to come up with a different answer. I mean,
Mhm.
an answer. Um, so the pausing is good. Not knowing
Mhm.
is good. I would rather, I mean, I'm going to say this again. I would rather you say, I have no idea. Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Because for so many reasons, be truthful. Yes, share what you know. And people are going to believe you more when you are more vulnerable and real.
Mhm.
When we try
And honest.
so hard to be perfect and um, and almost to a point of being plastic and false, you're not going to connect with your audience. Then you're going to lose your credibility. So hopefully that helps. And then one other thing about David's question about answering like an expert, maybe use your information, the answer that you do have, as the foundation and
Mhm.
stepping off point for the dialogue with the audience.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And Julie, I don't know how you feel about this, but oftentimes if I get asked a really good question, I'll say, that's a really good question. And that kind of helps them think, okay, they also are paying attention, they're smart, and they're thinking about the right things
Yeah.
in this presentation. And then you can kind of go from there while kind of giving them credit that they kind of found something that I may not know. So
Hmm. Hmm.
and they kind of have that validation too. So then more people are asking questions like, okay, maybe I can ask my question too, because this is how she handled that question. So
Brilliant. That's a really good point, Cassie, because what you're doing there with that example, you're putting yourself on the same level as the audience. Not,
mhm,
I'm so much better than you and I'm I'm all knowing, but you're
mhm.
allowing then, for lack of a better term, you're creating a safe environment for them to ask
Yeah,
questions.
you're approachable, so that you'll get more questions throughout. Yeah, cool.
I went to a presentation and I was trying to get the speaker on track to the topic because
Mhm.
he spent about 15 minutes about his whole experience in life and teenage years and 20s, and I wanted to hear more about marketing and I wasn't learning, and so I asked a question and his response was, Julie, buy the book. Hmm. Yeah. So I I didn't want to participate anymore, and I got different looks from the people at my table. They're like,
Mhm.
"Whoa, oh boy." So you don't want to be that speaker. Don't be the
Mhm.
one who cuts people off at the knees. So
Yeah.
yeah. So anybody else, and hopefully that helped David. Hopefully that dissertation of mine right there helped David.
Yeah, no, you typed in. Thank you. So that was great. And Natalia is actually writing in another question too, asking if you have any tips on preparing your voice for public speaking. So another really specific, great question, Natalia.
That is a good question. And it's interesting that she's asking that question as I'm on the tail end of a cold. So
Yeah.
if you and I, if we were all to talk next week, my voice would be up back maybe a half octave higher. To prepare your voice, and I will say I'm not a voice coach. I do have a friend and colleague who is a voice coach who can prepare that, for singing actually, but it could probably apply in speaking as well. But
Mhm.
what I do, I make sure that I drink enough water, I get enough sleep. Um, but most importantly, when you're relaxed, your voice and your throat are relaxed. So go back to what we talked about for Ginger, how to not be as nervous when you go on stage. So relax your voice. I even sensed that I could feel it in my throat because I'm trying to make sure that my words come out. And because being under the weather for a couple of days, my voice was strained. But I would say make sure that you're relaxed before your presentation, and as if you're talking to a friend. And when you get tense or nervous, you don't breathe as much. Your vocal cords, they tighten up, and then you're going to talk higher and more strained. So make sure that you're relaxed and definitely breathe. Do some breathing exercises. I would say breathing exercises, laughter exercises, and find your I guess, your happy place before you give a presentation. Hopefully that helps. Forgot who asked that question.
Yeah, Natalia, great. She said thanks. And Julie, I don't know, you may have mentioned this earlier, but I've had coaches who will say, prepare the same way each time. Like how you're like talking about finding your happy place. It's like find what works for you and do that consistently, and make sure that you can do it wherever you are. If you are a keynote speaker traveling, can you do this, your routine, in a hotel room or on the road or at different times throughout the day? So that you're preparing the same way, so that you're feeling on and in the flow, each of those times, whether it's for a lunch and learn or a 7 a.m. networking event or, a conference where you're the closing talk. And so that's, I've heard that advice. And it sounds like this happy place you're talking about is in line with that.
Yes. And to add on what you're saying, Cassie, it doesn't necessarily have to be elaborate either, right?
Right.
It could be a simple routine as, okay, 15 minutes before I'm supposed to be in the conference room, I'm going to find a quiet corner and just look outside. It could be something as simple as that. And so what I also heard you saying is that routine gives that, I guess, continuous confidence maybe, or consistency. Is that also what you were saying with that?
Yeah. The consistency factor of it, so that you can do it anytime, anywhere. If you find a space where you can meditate, if that's your thing, before your presentation, to do that each and every time. So you have that part of a routine. So then when you go into a presentation, it's almost routine versus like this big hoopla.
Right. You don't have to be wearing yoga pants and then change into your presentation clothes. Right. I would also make sure that, for me, talking to people or being on the phone or being distracted by, say, social media, emails, I make sure I don't do that. I would say at least 45 minutes to an hour before my presentation. But most of the time, I'm speaking at a conference, I'm sitting in on other sessions, so I can tie in what I've learned into my presentations. But my point here is try to keep yourself removed from as many distractions as possible. So if you have toddlers at home, you love them to death, but don't call them 15 minutes before, because you're going to find out that they have a boo-boo and you're going to be distracted. So try to eliminate your distractions.
No, that's great. That's great advice, Julie. Thank you. And I think we might have time for one or two more questions, but I'd love to get your thoughts on, when you're in flow, you're feeling good with a presentation, and then something derails you, or maybe you're completely stumped and you completely lose your train of thought. How do you get back into that flow when you're already in the middle and you're kind of derailed?
As you and people watching this webinar probably have noticed that I do derail myself sometimes, because I'm talking about the topic here. I have the PowerPoint, and then I think of other examples and I think, I should do that. So in my own mind, I might look like a train wreck, you going the whole derail theme. Then I do get back. How I do it, I guess maybe because I'm paying attention to what I'm doing, and then I realized, what are you talking about? Get back on track. What are you doing? Can you give me an example that you've experienced that I can?
Well, personally, I'm trying to think of, I'm in a conversation in a meeting, not even necessarily a large presentation, but I'll be talking about something and I'll completely lose my train of thought, and I'll just completely be stumped on what to say next. And then I get flustered, right? Because I feel like when you get derailed, you have this confidence to kind of, okay, I got derailed here, let's bring it back. But when you get stumped, you're like, I completely lost it, you know?
You know what? I think that's usually the moment in my life or in a presentation or in a talk, that's when I add humor. That's when I add humor. And that's when you could throw something in like, oh, that's what happens when when I've had 6 cups of coffee and I can't even focus. So what you've done is just as an example, that could be an example. So I would say right there is a moment. So you've caught yourself and you can add humor, kind of poke fun at yourself a little bit. And what that does, it'll add humor into the room. And with them chuckling a little bit, it'll give you a couple of seconds to then get back on track. I always think a few people I know on this call probably understand, like, yeah, humor, that's the way to do it. Let's see, what are some examples? Like, what are some others? I think of jokes in the moment.
Right. And in what's in context, in the group you're with.
And I might say something like, definitely self-deprecating and pointing out the fact that I was derailing helps lighten the mood. And also you're saying what everybody in the room is thinking. Like, how did she get so off track? Oh my gosh. And she's laughing at herself. Oh, cool. Okay, that's right. And then say if you're talking about numbers, like you didn't want to hear about those numbers anyway, but okay, here they are. Let's talk about how we met our goals. What, just does that kind of help you?
No, that makes sense. And to kind of lighten the mood too, because I don't know how other people on the call would feel, but I kind of feel silly. Like I was clearly zoned out and thought about something else, and I feel stupid. Like you said, remember, you're the expert, control the space. No, that's great. I like that. Use humor. I think that can work.
Just because I think so. Just because you derailed doesn't mean that you're going to get fired, right?
Right.
You're not going to lose your job. Yeah. Right. And then the fact that you can laugh at yourself makes everybody else in the room more comfortable. Oh, okay, she's got this. And how about this? Think of it this way. I was derailing and I got everything back on track and everything is running back on schedule. How cool am I?
Mm-hmm. No, I love this, Julie. I think some people, it sounds like I have some 1 o'clock some calls to attend, and we're approaching the hour, but it's been so great to spend this time with you. We really appreciate you presenting. I'd love to give you a minute if you have anything else you'd like to share before we end for the day.
Sure. Oh, I see some people. Okay, great conference call. Great points. Okay. I want to thank everybody for being on this call from no matter where you were, because wherever you are in the world, whether you speak one-on-one or to small groups or conversations at Christmas, maybe that might even help too. That'll be, you know what, we should do a webinar next week. But I also want to let you know, you can reach me on my website. I have, I do coach individuals and groups. Thank you for that. So if you feel like I could help you even further than this, I'd love to, because I love being able to use humor in our presentations and improv and allowing us to adapt to the unexpected and still come off as the expert. So if that appeals to everybody, you can reach out to me via email there. I really want to appreciate See what I just did there? I just combined a couple of sentences. Oh, I know. This is one. Okay. I just derailed, but then I just remembered an example. I've been on the Morning Blend TV show in Milwaukee about 8 times in the last few years. There was one time I was explaining something to a sub hostess about a laughter championship that I won. And I was explaining it. I was so excited. I talked so fast, and I started about 6 different sentences, Cassie. And then I could tell the hostesses, we're live at this point. The hostesses looked at me like, oh God, where is she going with this? And I said, okay, let me stop for a second. I have 6 thoughts and they're all trying to come out of my mouth at once. Let me start over. So So the hostesses laughed. So there is a good example right there of I totally derailed. I was trying to say too much at once and too fast. But what I did was I added humor. I acknowledged my guffaw. You know what? I added giggle to my guffaw. And they laughed. And even the producer or the cameraman laughed a little bit. And then we continued on with what I was talking about, adding humor, the benefits of humor in a workplace. So a serious topic, sort of, not really. So that's an example.
Yeah. No, that's great, Julie. And we really appreciate spending this time with you. It's been great to hear your feedback and real world advice and examples, and live answering all of our audience questions today. So thank you. I will share your contact information on the webinar website so that people can also reach out after the fact.
And that form, did we send that form?
We sent it out at the beginning with the chat, but I can send that out again after. I'll send that in the follow-up email along with your contact info. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Great. So thank you. Thank you again, Julie. Thank you to everyone for joining us. To find all of our archived and upcoming webinars, you can go to our website at alumni.northwestern.edu/career webinars, and have a great rest of your day. Go Cats.
Bye, everybody. Thanks. Oh, Lisa said that was fun. Bye.
Great.